Once in a while, stories about Hollywood are filled with drama that never made it to the screen, and in relation to Nancy Kulp and Buddy Ebsen, nicely their story is the sort that makes you lean in a little, nearer earlier than the Beverly Hillbillies threw those into the equal spotlight. Their lives had been already filled with the form of stories that would fill whole books. However, right here's the thing. What happened earlier than that iconic show clearly units the stage for the tension that simmered between them afterward. Allow start with Nancy. She wasn't your normal Hollywood superstar born in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. She became the most effective baby of Robert and Marjorie Kulp. Her dad became a traveling salesman, usually on the movie at the same time as her mother juggled coaching and later became a college predominant. Nancy grew up in a global of shape and training, transferring to Miami while she became nonetheless young. Using 1943, she'd earned a diploma in journalism and appeared set for a life in the back of the pen instead of in the front of the Digicom. However, Nanny's journey wasn't directly shot. She turned into writing for the Miami Beach Tropics, a neighborhood paper, interviewing large names like Clark Gable and royalty. Like the Duke and Duchess of Windsor now, not exactly small potatoes proper. Then World War II came calling and Nancy didn't hesitate. She left her research to be part of the USA Naval Reserve photo here younger and determined earning the rank of lieutenant. While serving her USA Now permits pause there for a second and flipped the coin to Buddy Ebsen. He become as distinct from Nancy. As you may get, born and raised in Orlando, Florida, Friend dreamed of dancing whilst he and his sister Vilma hit the vaudeville circuit. They were construct as the child of stairs. Friend had this smooth, laid-back appeal. People loved looking him dance. However, life wasn't all smooth sailing while Friend got to New York with barely sufficient money to grasp a sandwich. He knew he needed to hustle. The hustle paid off. Broadway came calling, and shortly, Hollywood wasn't some distance. At the back of Pal landed roles in musicals, danced with Shirley Temple, or even were given tapped via Walt Disney himself to help animate Mickey Mouse's moves, but things weren't constantly so magical. Buddy's profession hit a main snag whilst he become forged as the Tin Man within The Wizard of Oz. It sounds like a dream gig. Right now, not a lot. The makeup they used had aluminum dust, and it almost killed him. He ended up in the health center, and the position went to a person else. After that, Pal grew to become 2 other gigs, consisting of cruising and coaching naval officials in the course of World War II. He might have been easygoing. However, lifestyles had given him his truthful proportion of KNX Now image. Nancy and Buddy, 2 humans from completely distinct worlds each, with their personal quirks and drive by the point. The 50s rolled around. Nancy had moved to Hollywood. She'd gotten married, though it failed to ultimate, and taken a job in MGM's exposure department. A director noticed her, in concept she had the face for appearing. Soon she turned into doping up in small roles, gambling everything from a maid on I Love Lucy to a drunken waitress on Maverick. Nancy wasn't a leading girl, but she had this knack for stealing scenes along with her sharp wit and Noon's mindset. In the meantime, Buddy was busy carving out area for himself in TV. He had knack for gambling, folksy down-to-earth characters that audiences could not assist. However, love, he'd already constructed a reputation as a person dependable, a person smooth to work with as a minimum. It's how he came throughout to most folks. But right, here's in which things get exciting. By the past due 50s, Nancy and Buddy's paths had started out crossing in the global of television. They were not precisely operating aspect by aspect yet, but Thesity wasn't that huge. Nancy become earning a reputation as a clever, hard-working actress. However, she additionally had sturdy opinions and wasn't afraid to speak her thoughts. Pale, on the other hand, changed into recognized, forbing, extra-conventional, maybe even a bit old-fashioned, passioned in his perspective. Surlier than the Beverly Hillbillies came, alongside each, were chasing possibilities, any place they may. Nancy had a string of visitor spots on famous shows. She didn't have the typical Hollywood look, and she or he knew it. However, that didn't forestall her. She leaned into her unique style, gambling, quirky, memorable characters. Friend come in the meantime changed into bouncing among westerns, dramas, and the occasional comedy. He wasn't afraid to tackle roles that showed a darker facet either. Gambling villains on shows suggest like Gunsmoke and Maverick. By using the early 1960s, both had made their mark in Hollywood in their personal ways. However, neither of them had found that huge breakout role yet. That was approximately to trade of route with the Beverly Hillbillies. When the Beverly Hillbillies hit TV displays, it turned into like a rocket blasting off. People couldn't get sufficient of the Clampetts, this simple backwoods family, all of a sudden surrounded by using Beverly Hills glitz. The display turned into funny, fascinating, and a piece ridiculous, and it hooked tens of millions of viewers week after week at the middle of it. Nancy Kulp and Buddy Ebsen, while the creators of the Beverly Hillbillies have been casting, they knew they wanted someone special to play Jane Hathaway, the efficient, foul-looking secretary who works for Mr. Dale the Clampett's banker. Nancy turned into a supermatch, and Buddy, well, by means of, then he became a familiar face within the industry. His easygoing demeanor and knack for playing sensible fatherly characters made him an obvious desire for Jed Clampett. Jed changed into the spine of the Clampett-owned family, a man with little formal education. However, lots of common-sense friend added warmth and allure to the role, making Jed a person visitors felt they may agree with and root for. When the display premiered, it became an immediate hit. Humans cherished the fish-out-of-water tale of a family from the Ozark placing oil and stepping into a Beverly Hills mansion. The Clampetts were not just humorous, they had been relatable, their easy methods clashing with the extravagance of Beverly Hills created. All varieties of hilarious misunderstandings and proper, they're in the center of it all become Nancy Kulp as Miss Jane. Miss Jane wasn't just any secretary, she was smart, unswerving, and often the voice of cause when Mr. Dale, her boss, got a little too grasping. She truly cared approximately the Clampetts, especially Jed's nephew Jethro, and if you have ever watched the display you realize. Miss Jane had a piece of overwhelm on Jethro. Nancy performed her with this type of mix of humor and heart that you couldn't help but love her. She even earned an Emmy nomination for the position. Buddy's portrayal of Jed became just as iconic. Jed became the glue maintaining the circle of relatives together, while Granny stirred up problem. Ellie Mae charmed each person together with her sweetness, and Jethro bumbled his way through one wild scheme after another. Jed stayed calm. He changed into the voice of reason in a family full of chaos, and that catchphrase of his properly pups have become a part of American pop culture. But right here's where things get a little complicated on display screen. Nancy and Buddy's characters had a pleasant relationship off screen. Not so much the tension between them didn't come from their acting styles or their professionalism. No, it becomes them. Think deeper. Their personalities and, extra importantly, their views on the international clashed in ways that could not be overlooked. U-Spot Pal became politically conservative, and he did not shrink back from sharing his critiques. Nancy, on the opposite hand, leaned more liberal. It wasn't simply a distinction of opinion, it became a fundamental divide in how they saw the world. Now believe running with someone every day who stands for the whole lot. You do not consider that's what Nancy and Buddy had been handling. Consistent with other Forged members, they'd get into those heated debates every so often for weeks. On Quit, it wasn't just mild teasing or friendly banter, it became critical regardless of the tension. Each actor stayed expert on set they needed. To the show changed into a massive achievement, pulling in hundreds of thousands of visitors each week for even, as it became the #1 display on TV, and its popularity did not fade easily. Human beings loved the Clampetts of their antics, and as Nancy and Buddy might have disagreed in actual existence, they introduced their characters to lifestyles perfectly. Nanny's Miss Jane became one in all the maximum beloved characters at the display. She wasn't flashy or over the top, however. She became relatable. She changed into the kind of person, man or woman who labored tough, attempted to do the right element, and constantly appeared to get stuck inside the center of a person else's mess. And while her crush on Jethro might have been played for laughs, there was something candy about it too. Meanwhile, Buddy's Jed changed into the steady hand guiding the Clampetts through one ridiculous situation after every other, whether or not he become looking to make experience of Beverly Hills high society, or assisting Granny prepare dinner up some other batch of moonshine. Jed usually saved his cool. It's no surprise human beings tuned in week after week to see what the Clampetts could do. But in spite of all the achievement, the tension among Nancy and Buddy never honestly went away. Some say it were given worse as the display went on. It wasn't simply politics, it became a clash of personalities. Nancy changed into sharp highbrow and failed to back off from a fight, but he was charming. Certain, however, he can also be cussed. While the one's forces collided, sparks flew. It did not help that the show stored them in near quarters. As Miss Jane and Jed, they shared plenty of scenes collectively, and while they may have smiled and laughed on display, there has been an undercurrent of frustration that folks that have been paying attention could not forget about Donna Douglas, who performed Ellie Mae as soon as stated they'd argue for weeks about their differing views. Can you believe how aggravating that set have to have been? Nonetheless, they had been both professionals, and that they failed to let their disagreements wreck the display. That's not to mention it was clean, though, maintaining matters civil, even us operating so intently with someone you conflict with takes effort. But they pulled it off, and the audience by no means saw the tension that bubbled below the surface by the time the Beverly Hillbillies ended its run. It had grown to be a cultural phenomenon. People still talk about it nowadays, and its affect can be visible in Limitless. Different indicates for Nancy and Buddy, though the end of the display did not, imply the quit in their story. Their differences might keep to shape how they interacted even after the cameras stopped rolling. Nancy determined to pursue a completely new direction, politics. In 1984, years after the show wrapped Sharon for a seat within the U.S. House of Representatives, she became 62 on the time, and while some people puzzled if an actress should make the leap into politics, Nancy believed she could bring something valuable to the desk. After all, Ronald Reagan had executed it, hadn't he? Nancy ran as a Democrat in Pennsylvania's 9th Congressional District. It turned into a difficult race from the begin. The district was solidly Republican, and her opponent, Bud Schuster, had already served 6 terms. However, Nancy wasn't one to back down from an assignment. She campaigned tough, connecting with people and sharing her thoughts for change. Even though she knew the percentages had been against her, she gave it her all. What she didn't anticipate became for Buddy Ebsen to step into the fight, and no longer on her side pal, who had no ties to Pennsylvania or the race, volunteered to report a radio ad for her opponent. In the ad, he referred to as Nancy too liberal and accused her of the use of her celebrity status to sway electorate. It wasn't just a disagreement, it was personal. Nancy felt blindsided. For years she and friend had butted heads. However, this felt like a betrayal on a whole new level. Nancy did not maintain again when she spoke. Approximately it later, she stated, Buddy had no enterprise getting worried and ought to have stayed out of it. He is not the kindly antique Jed Clampett that you noticed on the show, she said in a single interview. Definitely pissed off. She additionally made it clear that at the same time as they'd never gotten alongside, she would have never achieved something like that to him. You could pay attention? The hurt in her words, even years after the truth the ad didn't assist Nanny's marketing campaign in. Truth it would have harm its. He lost the election with the aid of a massive margin, together with her opponent taking greater than 66% of the vote later on. Nancy stated she did not blame friend for her defeat, but the sting of his actions stayed with her. She left Pennsylvania for a while to clear her head, returning handiest after she'd had time to method what had befell friend for his element, failed to appear to regret his moves on the time. He firmly believed in what he'd said about Nancy and stood by means of it. But as the years passed, it appears even he started to sense a few regret in the direction of the quit of his existence. He expressed remorse over the ad and the manner their feud had spiraled out of manipulate, regrettably, with the aid of then it become too overdue to completely mend the dating. Nancy and pal had very little touch after the campaign. And once they did reconcile, it changed into quick. Nancy located solace in coaching a ardor that allowed her to channel her information and experience into something significant. She have become an artist in residence at Juniata College, a small liberal art school nestled in Pennsylvania's quiet countryside there. She taught appearing training and stimulated Limitless college students who got here through her schoolroom doorways. Her time at Juniata regarded to mark a peaceful chapter in her existence, away from the brilliant lighting fixtures of Hollywood and the turbulence of politics. Nancy discovered a network that valued her for her perception and warmth. College students later spoke approximately how an awful lot they famous her, no longer just for her Hollywood fame, but for her willpower to supporting others grow. She added humor and coronary heart to her lessons, making her. College students experience that the stage may be a place for anyone, irrespective of where they came from. It's clean to imagine her smiling as she shared tales of her days on the Beverly Hillbillies, sprinkling in advice about life both on and stale. The level Nancy also frolicked performing in nearby theatre productions and occasionally made guest appearances on TV, she never absolutely stepped away from performing. While she shifted her focus toward eaching, it became clear she loved the craft, and her later paintings pondered a deep appreciation for the energy of storytelling, but she failed too. Simply act, she lived a complete and colorful existence out of doors, the spotlight Nancy had a knack for, connecting with humans properly, whether it turned into her students' buddies or buddies, and she or he made the most of her time in 1990. But Nancy faced a new project when she changed into diagnosed with cancer. Despite the analysis, she remained as determined as ever, persevering with to teach and stay lively in her community for as lengthy as her fitness allowed, friends and colleagues described her as courageous and robust characteristics she had shown. In the course of her life, she surpassed away in 1991, leaving behind a legacy that went some distance past her position as Miss Jane. Hathaway Nye's tale became one of persistence, creativity, and a refusal to be defined by using one chapter of her existence. Paul Ebsen, in the meantime, had his own path in the one's later years. Although he stayed in the amusement enterprise, his work slowed down as he aged after the Beverly Hillbillies ended. Pal saved performing, taking roles in movies and television shows. He even starred in a famous detective series known as Barnaby Jones, which ran for numerous years and saved him inside the public eye. But no matter what he did, human beings couldn't assist but accomplice him with Jed Clampett. That man or woman, with his homespun appeal and iconic catchphrase, had ended up larger than life. However, he failed to appear to thoughts. The affiliation, at least no longer outwardly, he embraced the affection enthusiasts had for Jed, even if it intended once in a while being typecast. However, privately, it wasn't constantly smooth. Consider building a profession full of variety and skills, simplest to be remembered, for one role, still. Friend handled it with grace, often performing at activities and interviews wherein he happily reminisced approximately his time on the Beverly Hillbillies. He wrote a memoir later in life sharing stories about Hollywood, High's career, and sure, even the infamous feud with Nancy. Outside of performing, Buddy had masses to preserve him busy. He turned into an finished sailor and spent a whole lot of his unfastened time at the water. He also dabbled in writing, penning novels that gave him a creative outlet. Beyond performing, Buddy had always been a person of many abilities, and he located ways to stay active and engaged while the years went by way of in his personal existence. Friend enjoyed a long marriage to Dorothy, no longer his third spouse, and spent his later years surrounded via family. He lived to the splendid age of 95, passing away in 2003. Via then, most of his contemporaries had been long past, and he changed into one of the final dwelling connections to the golden age of television. His death marked the end of technology, but his legacy lived on through the endless runs of the Beverly Hillbillies, and the memories of individuals who had worked with him returned. Their tale feels like a collision of two robust personalities who simply couldn't find common ground. They were each passionate, proficient, and fiercely opinionated, and their variations created a rift that was hard to bridge. Nonetheless, it's not possible to disregard the magic they created, together on display as Jed and Miss Janethy introduced laughter and heat to hundreds of thousands of visitors, a testimony to their professionalism and skills.